Welcome back. Today I'm doing something a little bit different. I'm going to be taking the political compass test. I've wanted to do this for a while now so you can see exactly where I stand politically and have a clear baseline for my future videos. There's a lot going on in the news right now with people like Maduro and Tim Walz, but I wanted to start the year with something a little bit lighter and a touch more personal, so no need to beat around the bush any further. Let's get into it. Alright, so I'm on the home screen here. This is saying not to think too deeply about the questions and just answer what comes to mind first. I'll probably have some trouble doing that. I'll try to stick to my first thoughts, but it's entirely possible that as I talk through some of these, I'll end up changing my mind. Oh, what's going on? Okay. If economic globalization is inevitable, it should primarily serve humanity rather than the interests of transnational corporations. Okay. Questions worded in a way that makes you want to say agree. I mean, who doesn't want to serve humanity? But I actually lean disagree here because I don't know who's making the decisions on how to serve humanity. Is it the government? Is there one person at the top of some global organization? I don't trust anything government related to be run fairly or efficiently. Instead, I think government should just get out of the way and let businesses flourish. If government just steps aside, protects property rights and fair competition, businesses will do well, and businesses must serve ordinary people in order to survive. They will create jobs, they'll innovate, they'll offer better, cheaper products. In that sense, creating an environment where business flourishes does serve humanity, so I disagree. All right, next one. I'd always support my country, whether it was right or wrong. Disagree on this one. It's pretty simple. Support your country when they do right, criticize when they do wrong. I wouldn't support a strike on Canada right now, and I don't think anybody would. So disagree. The next one. No one chooses their country of birth, so it's foolish to be proud of it. I think I agree. This is a tough one because when you look around, people are always proud of their country. Even Venezuelans in America right now are proud to be Venezuelan, despite hating their government. But when I read this, my first thought is being proud of your country, as in being proud of, basically as being proud of your government. And I think that that's foolish. I think when people say they're proud of being Venezuelan, proud of being Iranian or Somalian or Afghani, I don't think that most people are referring to the government. Instead, it's their history, it's the people they knew growing up, the people who are fighting the good fight back in their home country. It's not the government that they're proud of, it's the everyday people. So I don't know if that's really what this question was asking, but I'll say agree because my mind first went to government. Okay, next one. Our race has many superior qualities compared with other races. Immediate, strong disagree. I don't believe that we are separated by race as much as we are separated by class. I have more in common with a middle class black man than I do a random white guy living in the slums of Chicago. I have more in common with my old black neighbor than I do with Jeff Bezos. And one thing about this, I saw a clip from Nick Fuentes the other day, and he did what many people do, not just him, but they associate the culture fostered by different classes with the race that predominantly makes up that class. And I think that's totally wrong. Yes, the culture of the inner cities is terrible. I have nothing in common with the people there. But that culture was created not because the people are predominantly black, but because the people are predominantly poor. White poor people can fall into the exact same traps that the poor black people do. It's not a race thing, it is a class thing. I'm reminded of the book Black Rednecks and White Liberals by Thomas Sowell. And full disclosure here, I haven't actually read this book, but I know what the basic premise is. Sowell argues that the inner city ghetto culture actually derives from the culture of poor Southern whites, particularly the Scots-Irish settlers who came from the borderlands of Britain. That culture was characterized by violence, anti-intellectualism, too much pride, a poor work ethic. Over centuries of slavery, Southern blacks absorbed that culture from the poor whites around them. And then during the Great Migration, when blacks moved north, they brought that culture with them, and it became what we now see as urban ghettos. Sowell's point was that it's a cultural problem, not a racial one, which is why he contrasts it with northern free blacks at the time and West Indian blacks who did not have that same cultural inheritance and performed much better. Anyways, I say that to say that I strongly disagree with this statement. So, next one. The enemy of my enemy is my friend. I disagree with this. Friend is too strong of a word. You can strategically ally with the enemy of your enemy, but that doesn't make them a friend. Think of World War II. We essentially had to ally with the Soviet Union, and then almost as soon as the war ended, we were back to hating each other. Now, it's not that they were ever our friend. We just had to swallow our differences and work together to solve a common goal. And more recently, we helped out Saddam Hussein in Iraq and the Iran-Iraq War. Then we turned around and went to war with him twice. In Afghanistan, we armed the Mujahideen against the Soviet invasion, and then they turned around and became the Taliban and Al Qaeda, and we know what happened there. So, no, the enemy of my enemy is not my friend. They're just a strategic alliance, and oftentimes just an enemy waiting to happen. All right. Military action that defies international law is sometimes justified. Yeah, agree, I think. Mostly because people don't seem to ever agree on what international law is. And there's a debate going on right now after the Maduro capture on whether international law even exists. And I mean, yeah, it exists in the sense that it's a real thing, but there is no enforcement body, so it really doesn't have any real effect on the world. And the international courts are a complete joke. There's a reason America doesn't belong to that. So, because nobody can agree on what international law is, and there is no enforcement, and I don't trust the international court not to be partial to their friends, I will agree with this. Okay, next up. There is now a worrying fusion of information and entertainment. Let's see. Eileen, agree. Too many people who are entertainers at heart found their fame in the political world. I mean, just look at Candace Owens. She was an extra in some rap video years ago before ever becoming famous. And now she just found her fame in politics. She's an entertainer at heart, masquerading as someone with valuable information to give. And no, that doesn't mean that she should be taken off the air. Just it means that you, as a viewer, need to be aware that many people who claim to be giving you knowledge are just out there for clicks, fame, and money. So be careful who you listen to. And yes, it's worrying because many people, especially the chronically online, are falling for the shticks of these entertainers. An older example that we all know, Alex Jones. He said that Sandy Hook wasn't real; that the kids were just actors. He's an entertainer. He's not a smart person that you should be getting your information from. So, anyways, I agree. All right, next page. People are ultimately divided more by class than by nationality. Okay, nationality is different from race. Earlier, I said that people are more divided by class than by race, but on this one, I'm not so sure. Do I have more in common with a middle-class British guy than a poor American? In some aspects, sure, but at least the poor American grew up in America, with roughly the same customs and traditions that I grew up with. So I disagree on this one. And one more thing, nationality is different than ethnicity. If it were ethnicity, I'd probably absolutely agree, assuming that the people are properly assimilated. I have more in common with a middle-class ethnic Asian who grew up in America than I do a dirt poor homeless guy who lives underneath the bridge. But that wasn't the question. It was about nationality, which to me means somebody who grew up and lives in a different country. So I disagree on this one. Okay, controlling inflation is more important than controlling unemployment. Tough one here. I agree. Inflation affects absolutely everyone, while employment just affects those who are unemployed. Neither are good, obviously, but if you focus on inflation, then you help out everyone. Milton Friedman said that if you try to fight high unemployment by letting inflation run wild, you end up with both high inflation and high unemployment. But controlling inflation creates conditions for stable employment growth, and I agree with that. So, next up, because corporations cannot be trusted to voluntarily protect the environment, they require regulation. Okay, first thoughts is disagree. That's the typical conservative response, but I hesitate a bit because the problem is that we've seen that play out and it led to pollution disasters. But despite that, I still will say disagree, because the issue isn't that corporations can't be trusted. It's that we've structured the system so that they face no real consequences for polluting. Right now, air, water, and public land are treated as commons that nobody owns, so there's no real punishment for using them carelessly. But if we had stronger, clearer property rights, whether that's through private ownership, easements, or enforceable downstream rights, then people affected by pollution could go after companies through tort law and lawsuits. Businesses would have a direct financial incentive to self-regulate because polluting would expose them to massive liability. One concern with that is that massive corporations could then just buy up all the property. But if you protect the property rights of people downstream or downwind so that they can still sue for damages when their water or air gets polluted, then companies would still have a real incentive to clean up their act. The threat of a lawsuit is a powerful regulator. So I say disagree, not because I think pollution isn't a problem, but because I think the market solution, strong property rights plus tort liability, is much better than top-down government regulation. Okay, next up. From each according to his ability to each according to his need is a fundamentally good idea. Strongly disagree. Easiest one yet. This is essentially the Marxist motto. The government will take from you what they determine you can give, and give to you only whatever the government decides that you need. Absolutely terrible. Strong disagree. Next up. The freer the market, the freer the people. Agree. Not much to really say about that one. Okay, next up. It's a sad reflection on our society that something as basic as drinking water is now a bottled, branded consumer product. Strongly disagree. Think of just how much access you have to clean water. That is only because it is a bottled, branded consumer product. Next up, land shouldn't be a commodity bought and sold. Again, strongly disagree. This nation rests on the foundation that is property rights. So, yeah, strongly disagree. Okay, next up. It is regrettable that many personal fortunes are made by people who simply manipulate money and contribute nothing to their society. Um, Disagree. What this question calls manipulating money is often just providing liquidity and risk management, which are real services. Speculators let farmers hedge crop prices. They let you easily buy stocks for retirement, help you discover accurate prices so capital flows to where it's most productive. That said, I will admit that not all finance is productive. At a certain point, the financial sector can grow too large and start extracting rents instead of creating value. And they'll pull talent away from innovation and into speculation. So I disagree with the blanket claim that they contribute nothing, but I'd acknowledge that there is a real debate on where to draw the line. But for this question, disagree. All right, moving on. Protectionism is sometimes necessary in trade. Yes, I agree with that. Things that are necessary for our national security, we need to be protectionist about. Now, does that mean we need to go as far as Trump has with the tariffs? That's a different debate. But we should be keeping things like chip manufacturing, steel, those sorts of things in-house. We need them for our military. All right. The only social responsibility of a company should be to deliver a profit to its shareholders. The only responsibility? I don't know. I think I agree with this. This is getting at the Milton Friedman shareholder responsibility position versus the stakeholder capitalism position that essentially every school teaches their students now in business school. Friedman's position wasn't the company should go around ripping people off to make an extra buck, but rather the best way to maximize long-term profits may include treating workers and consumers well. Now, it's not the job of corporate executives to decide what social causes to spend money on. The shareholders can do that with the money that they earn from dividends. So yeah, the only responsibility is to make a profit. And if it's done right, that will include treating employees, consumers, and the environment well, because that sets you up for long-term profits. Now, it can't be short-term thinking. That leads to manipulation and doing things for a quick buck. That just turns into Enron. But with good long-term thinking, I agree with this statement. All right, next. The rich are too highly taxed. You're not ever going to find me, banging the drum saying that the rich pay too much in taxes, but I do agree with this just on principle. I think that we should have a flat tax, and any idea of a wealth tax is just an absolute economy killer, so stop with that. So, yeah, I'll agree, largely because I know what the question is getting at, and I don't agree with what it's getting at. Next up, those with the ability to pay should have access to higher standards of medical care. Okay, another doozy here. I agree, and I know that sounds harsh, but the answer has to be agree. Because, should people with money have the ability to pay for top specialists, private facilities, and experimental treatments? The answer has to be yes, or else you kill the profit incentive that drives medical innovation. If the prices for medical care were set by the government, research and development on new medicine techniques would just dry up, especially when it comes to rare diseases. What needs to happen, at least as far as prescription medicine goes, is that we need to do all we can to force other nations to open up their markets. Right now, Americans pay through the nose on medicine because Canada and the EU, essentially, they cap prices on medicine. So the pharmaceutical companies need to charge Americans higher in order to fund their research and development, the research and development can cost millions to billions for each new medicine that gets on the market. But if we also cap our prices and those R&D funds totally dry up for those rare diseases, if those other countries get rid of their caps, then our prices could then come down because the pharmaceutical companies could spread their profit around the globe rather than just count on Americans. So, anyways, that was my long way of saying agree. Moving on. Governments should penalize businesses that mislead the public. My first thought is disagree, because who decides what is misleading? Again, this goes back to kind of my basic distrust of the government, or more specifically, my distrust of those in charge of the government. Now just think back to COVID. We were told that the lab leak theory was misinformation, but that ended up being almost certainly true. So are we going to trust the government to decide when a company misleads the people? I guess, obviously, if something insane happens and you have a toothpaste company selling toothpaste that is pure sugar, then yeah, they deserve some punishment. But I guess at the same time, the marketplace would punish them for it. So the government probably doesn't need to get involved. So I'll stick with disagree on that. Okay. A genuine free market requires restrictions on the ability of predator multinationals to create monopolies. This is another one that I think I go against the typical conservative thought. Because in my mind, if there is a monopoly, how free is the market? Is it really any different than a government running an entire industry? I guess to answer my own question there, it is different because at least the monopoly still has to produce for the consumer. The government just has to produce enough for who's ever in charge at the top to make a little bit of money. So I'd rather have a monopoly than a government run business. But still, I think for a truly free market, you need to have competition, which means that sometimes the government must step in and prevent true monopolies from forming. Now, there are also some businesses that can become monopolies just because they are that much better than everyone else. These are called natural monopolies, and that's generally fine. They did it because they're more efficient and offer better products than everyone else. Those types of monopolies are okay because as soon as they start raising prices or reducing quality, competitors will be able to step in and undercut them. But monopolies that abuse government power by taking advantage of regulations, licensing laws, those sort of things, those need to be prevented. And that's the type of monopoly that I believe this question is asking about. So I agree. All right, next page here. Loaded fast. Abortion, when the woman's life is not threatened, should always be illegal. Strongly agree. A bit of a personal story here. I was adopted as an infant. My birth mother was 15 years old. That is all that I know about her, and I thank the Lord every day that she chose me. Speaking of that, go listen to the song She Chose Me by Ray Lynn. A beautiful story about her mother who was in a situation where she easily could have chosen an abortion, but she chose not to and then gave birth to Ray Lynn. That's one of my favorite songs ever. It always brings me to tears, so go listen to it. She Chose Me by Ray Lynn. All right. All authority should be questioned. Yeah. Yeah, I agree. But to an extent, there's a difference between healthy skepticism and conspiracy theories. You don't want to become like Candace Owens, where everything is a conspiracy, denying the evidence no matter how clear it is. You question to the extent where there is evidence to the contrary. COVID lab leak was a good time to question authority. There was evidence to back up what we were told was a conspiracy theory. But other things, if there's no evidence, don't go down useless rabbit holes. You end up looking absolutely insane to the average person. Next one, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. Agree. My mind immediately goes to foreign policy on this question, and I think it's honestly even stronger than an eye for an eye. If America is attacked in any way, it should be an eye for a life and a tooth for power. If Mexico were to deliberately send a missile at America, the president needs to go. When the Houthis attack our ships, we should destroy the tents and the camel skins that they live in. So I agree, absolutely. Okay, taxpayers should not be expected to prop up any theaters or museums that cannot survive on a commercial basis. This one I'm actually going to agree with, and I may have said disagree a couple of years ago, even maybe just last year, but I've been listening to Andrew Klavan, who's really big into the arts, and he has convinced me otherwise. I probably won't do his argument justice, so just go listen to him. He's really fascinating to listen to, but I'll attempt to make an argument. The arts transmit civilizational values like virtue, truth, and beauty. A culture devoid of truth and beauty loses its soul and its identity. What you end up with when you optimize profit is endless Marvel movies and Kardashians, not objectively great art like Shakespeare and classical music. A society that produces what makes money, only what makes money, will eventually not have anything left worth preserving. So agree on that. Next up, schools should not make classroom attendance compulsory. Disagree. Kids need to go to school. It instills good values, instills a work ethic, things that you need in life. Next one. All people have their rights, but it is better for all of us that different sorts of people should keep to their own kind. Okay, wow. My first thought when I read this is obviously about race, so I strongly disagree with that. If you're talking, cultures voluntarily maintaining distinct identities, that's a different conversation, but I think the question is getting at racial segregation, and I strongly disagree with that. As I said before, people are not divided by race like many want you to believe. And this it kind of reminds me of a tweet I saw earlier from someone who was a Christian nationalist. I don't know who he was. But he said that when Christian nationalism takes control, interracial marriage will be an executable offense. Like, no, that's horrifying. That's ethno-nationalism. It's not conservatism. I want nothing to do with that, so strongly disagree. Good parents sometimes have to spank their children. Sure, agree. I was spanked as a kid. I'm fine. If you know your kid, know how they'll respond, then it's fine. Now, if you have an extremely sensitive kid, then it might not be the best idea, but I don't think you're a bad parent if you spank your kids, just like I don't think you're a bad parent if you don't. Now, I understand both sides, but I'm fine with a light spanking here and there if you know who your kid is and don't take it too far. It's natural for children to keep some secrets from their parents. I mean, yeah, obviously, right? Like, I don't think I'd believe you if you said that you never kept a secret as a kid. So, Moving on, possessing marijuana for personal use should not be a criminal offense. I disagree with this one, and I'll admit that it is for a dumb reason. I honestly just despise the smell of marijuana. I don't want to have to smell it everywhere I go. So yeah, I'll admit it's a selfish reason, but I guess also there are people that I know who I've seen become absolutely addicted to the stuff, where they can't eat or sleep without smoking first. It's honestly sad to see. So combine that with just how gross the smell is. Sure, I'm all for criminalizing it. The prime function of schooling should be to equip the future generation to find jobs. I disagree with that. I actually think we need a serious overhaul of the school system. Right now, people treat college as job training, but anyone who's been through college could tell you that a real apprenticeship could teach you more in 4 years than college. I went to law school. I learned a lot, and I did very well. But students who knew what type of law they wanted to practice, they would have been much better served, in my opinion, learning under somebody who's already practicing. Instead they just sit in the classroom. Honestly, I think really only doctors need to go to college, maybe engineers too. I don't know enough about the profession to say that, but lawyers, absolutely not. So here's what I think that the system should be. Elementary through high school should equip you with basic knowledge and critical thinking skills. College should teach you how to think deeply about the world, how to grapple with big ideas, understand civilization. And rather than go to college, you should take an apprenticeship to learn your profession from somebody who's actually in that profession. But that's obviously not what happens. Instead, college is a 4-year job training program that costs a fortune, where you take one philosophy class so they can still claim that they're teaching you how to think. That's just a scam, really. And unless you're going to become a Jordan Peterson, then it's largely a waste of time and money. So disagree. Yeah, I already have that there. All right, one more thing. The idea that it should the function of school should be to equip the future generation to find jobs is what has broken the school system. Sorry, moving on. People with serious inheritable disabilities should not be allowed to reproduce. Is this asking if I'm in favor of forced sterilization? Strong disagree. All right, the most important thing for children to learn is to accept discipline. I disagree with this. I think it's important for children to learn how to accept discipline, but it's not the most important thing in the world. What is the most important? I guess I would say learning to take responsibility for their own actions. The question asks about accepting discipline, but far more importantly is learning how to develop the self-discipline to make good choices on their own. And as I said before, take control of their own life. So no, accepting discipline is not the most important. All right, there are no savage and civilized people. There are only different cultures. Strongly disagree. You have to be willing to say that some cultures are better than others. That's just a fact. Are you really going to try to argue that Western civilization is morally the same as a civilization that practiced human sacrifice? No, you're insane if you think that, or just morally relativistic, which is idiotic. The question actually reminds me of a project I did in high school, which I talked about in one of my earliest videos on this channel. Let's see if I can link to it somewhere above. But in high school, we were split into groups of about 5, and each group had a specific book to read. And we each wrote an argumentative research paper about the book. Now, afterwards, we read everyone else's book, and then we read everyone else's research papers. Then we went to the front of the class, and we had to defend our paper against questions and challenges from our classmates. It was honestly a fantastic project. I read the book Things Fall Apart by Chinua Achebe, the great Nigerian novelist, I believe. This book was about a colonialist power going into an African tribe and essentially destroying the culture of the tribe. I argued that Achebe didn't think that it was entirely a bad thing that colonialist power came in. My argument was that some of the practices he mentioned in the book would be seen as terrible by any modern Western standard. So, for example, when twins were born, the tribe would leave the twins in the woods to die alone. The colonial power ended that practice. I don't think Achebe would have included that practice in the story if he wanted us to believe that colonialism was entirely negative. I ended up getting ripped up and down for that argument by my classmates, but Achebe said himself later in life that colonialism was a mixed bag. Some positives, some negatives. You cannot say that you think, you can't say that it's a mixed bag if you think all cultures are the same. You must believe that some cultures are better than others if you're willing to say that colonialism wasn't all negative. So I was right. Somehow I still got the worst grade in the class, but I will die on the hill that I deserve better. And my thesis was proved right by Achebe's own words. Maybe my writing was bad. So rant's over. Some civilizations better than others. Moving on. Those who are able to work and refuse the opportunity should not expect society's support. Strongly agree with that. If you are able to work and you choose not to, you do not deserve a dime from the government. Just go get a job at Burger King. All right, when you are troubled, it's better not to think about it, but to keep busy with more cheerful things. I generally agree with this. Obviously, it's not good to hide away and not think about whatever's troubling you forever, but you must be able to set it aside and get to work, get things done, fulfill your duties. If you dwell on it too much, then you might let your duties slip. It's better to set aside for the time being, get your things done, and then, think about it when you have time to figure it out later. Next up, first generation immigrants can never be fully integrated within their new country. Um, I think yes, agree. For first generation immigrants, I think it's possible. You didn't grow up in American culture with American customs and traditions. No matter how much you try to assimilate, it won't completely happen. You'll always have some of your old country with you. That said, I think immigrants have a duty to try to assimilate, if for no other reason than to help their kids. If you raise your kids in the way of your old country, wherever that may be, then they'll be behind the eight ball when they try to enter the workforce. So, yeah, agree on that one. What's good for the most successful corporation is always ultimately good for us. Disagree. I mean, what would be best for the most successful corporations? That their competition completely goes away? That would not be good for us. Competition drives prosperity for the rest of the people. So I disagree. Easy one there. No broadcasting institution, however independent its content, should receive public funding. I'll disagree on this one. I don't have a problem with a state-funded weather program or something like that. News, I guess, is a completely different story. Like NPR should not and never should have had public funding. News is way too easily manipulated by who's ever in power. But something like the weather, yeah, whatever. Go ahead. So I disagree with this. All right. Next page. I get a sip of water. All right. Our civil liberties are being excessively curbed in the name of counterterrorism. I lean disagree on this, and maybe it's because of my age. I was born in 1997. I was just about to turn 4 when 9/11 happened. I essentially grew up in this counterterrorism world that we live in, so it's all just normal to me. Now, maybe I'm just not as educated on what's actually going on behind the scenes. If so, then please enlighten me, and I mean that seriously. But in my life, I haven't felt like my civil liberties have been excessively curbed in any way. At the same time, and I've heard stories of massive terror plots being foiled. So yeah, I'll stick with disagree. A significant advantage of a one-party state is that it avoids all the arguments that delay progress in a democratic political system. I mean, I guess that's one advantage of a fascist dictator, that whatever he says immediately gets done. If you absolutely had to pick something and call it an advantage, that may be it. But is it really an advantage? Arguments are how ideas get refined, how they become better. With a fascist dictator, while his ideas get done efficiently, they just end up efficiently killing millions of people. So no, it's not a significant advantage. Disagree. Although the electronic age makes official surveillance easier, only wrongdoers need to be worried. Strongly disagree. Who knows what the government will deem to be wrong in 10 years? Cancel culture started because people were digging up decade-old tweets that were, fine at the time, but now they're viewed as wrong. You could be saying something that right now is totally harmless. You could be doing something that's totally harmless, but when the wrong people get in power, if society shifts, then they'll decide that your harm action from a decade ago was actually a hate crime. So no, I disagree strongly. The death penalty should be an option for the most serious crimes. Okay, look, I'm Catholic, so I'd like to say disagree here, but if I'm being honest, when I read what some of those people on death row did, I say send them to the guillotine ASAP. I'd like to see my opinion change on this to become more in line with the Vatican on this one, but right now I'm not there, so I'll agree. In a civilized society, one must always have people above to be obeyed and below to be commanded. They really worded this one in a scary way. I think what it's essentially saying is that hierarchies are important in a society, which is absolutely true. So, yeah, I agree. Societies can't function when everyone is on the same level. It just does not work in the real world. Hierarchies emerge naturally in the world. That's just human nature. And they're not rigid hierarchies. You can move up and down them at different points in your life as you gain and lose respect. But hierarchies are a fact of life, and you must have them in society, so I agree. Abstract art that doesn't represent anything shouldn't be considered art at all. Agree. I live in Omaha, and we have some truly, truly awful statues down by the airport. It's just a bunch of random giant metal sticks interlapping each other without any real shape to them. I'm sure that the artist worked hard and called some lame name like Milky Skies in an hourglass or some shit like that, but no, it's not art. Agree. Criminal justice punishment should be more important than rehabilitation. Agree. I guess to be more specific, I'd say it depends on the age of the criminal. For kids, or juveniles as the legal system calls them, rehabilitation is more important, I think. Instead of scaring them into being good, just try to change the way they think so that they actually want to be good. When it comes to adults, punish them. In law school, I took a class called Contemporary Issues in Juvenile Court. It's total like ideology dump. We had to submit to the ideology of the professor, but whatever. A friend and I did our year-end project on restorative justice, which is essentially just therapy with the people that you harmed. I see how that can benefit some people, especially children, but no, that should not be the model for the criminal justice system. When you're an adult, you deserve punishment. You can take punishment. So, agree. It's a waste of time to try to rehabilitate some criminals. Yeah, I strongly agree. I don't think I really need to say much about this. Some people are just beyond saving. The business person and the manufacturer are more important than the writer and the artist. Oof, okay. I'm struggling with the words more important because yeah, I think both are important, especially in Western civilization. But we go back to the basics, to the start of a country, which is more important than the businessman is. Yeah, he drives the economy, he creates jobs, he's the one putting food on the table for essentially everyone around him. So, in that sense, the businessman is more important, and I will say agree. Mothers may have careers, but their first duty is to be homemakers. Yeah, agree. A mother's first duty is to be a mom, just as a father's first duty is to be father's first duty is to be a good husband, then a good dad. You be the best dad you can be by being a good husband. So, agree. Almost all politicians promise economic growth, but we should heed the warnings of climate science that growth is detrimental to our efforts to curb global warming. Strongly disagree. Humans have shown again and again that we are better at mitigation than we are prevention. While the temperature may rise by 1 or 2 degrees over the next 100 years or whatever they say it is, our time and money is better spent mitigating the effects of possible natural disasters than it is trying to change the world climate. Build bigger levees, increase air conditioning, improve the power grid, do the things that protect lives when disaster strikes rather than trying to create 1 or 2 less natural disasters per year by preventing climate change. Okay, next up, making peace with the establishment is an important aspect of maturity. Yes, agree. It's not that you need to submit to the establishment, but you need to recognize that sometimes, things are the way they are for a reason. Our country has operated for 250 years now. The establishment is there because the establishment has proven to allow us to flourish. Now, does that mean that things can't change? No, absolutely not. They can always be better, but you can't go throwing everything away because you don't like the establishment. And this reminds me of the Groyper idea of just letting Democrats win the elections to accelerate the fall of the system. Now, they don't believe that Trump is doing things fast enough. And look, if you want more done, then fine. But recognize that Trump has done a ton of stuff this year. If you think he's done so little that you would rather see our country fall apart, then you don't understand how politics work in America. And politics work the way they do right now because it has gotten us to our 250-year anniversary. It works. I know it does because we still live in the United States. So don't be an idiot. Just don't be a groiper. Okay, next page. All right, astrology accurately explains many things. Strongly disagree. Moving on. You cannot be moral without being religious. Ooh, this is an interesting one. I'll say agree. Let me explain. In today's day, you can be moral without believing in God. But that's only because we live in a Christian society. Now, last week, I saw a tweet. It was either from Spencer Clavin or retweeted by him. I can't remember which. But it was talking about the new Odyssey movie coming out. And it talked about how people today would be and are horrified by Odysseus because of the terrible thing that he does in the book. He murders for seemingly no reason, sleeps with Circe for a year while she keeps his men literally turned into pigs. He and his son slaughter the suitors who court Penelope and then hang the servant woman who slept with the suitors. That stuff is just morally repugnant to us today, but back in those times, people would have no problem with their hero doing those things because they did not live in a Christian society. They never had the moral framework that everyone in the West has today, where humans have dignity, cruelty is sinful, mercy is a virtue. Now, they didn't have that, but we do. So, yes, you can be moral without believing in God today, but only because you're inheriting a moral system that Christianity created. And even then, if you're not religious to God, then you're religious to some things. And if you believe in the moral system of our society, then you're religious to the societal standards, which are in turn tied to God. So, checkmate, atheists. If you're moral, you are religious. Agree. Charity is better than Social Security as a means of helping the genuinely disadvantaged. Agree. The government is far too inefficient to handle that as effectively as private charity would. So, moving on. Some people are naturally unlucky. Again, quick agree here. I know some say that you create your own luck, and in some ways that's true, but I think it's undeniable that some people are luckier than others, some are unluckier than others. So, agree. It's important that my child's school instills religious values. This goes back to what we were just talking about. If you are in the West, your school teaches religious values because this country, because Western civilization, is built upon the foundation that is Jerusalem. It's built on the Bible. So even if you don't learn about Jesus' teachings are coming through. Even if you don't learn the Ten Commandments, which I believe every school should teach simply because it is so foundational to our civilization, but even if they don't teach them, you still learn the values that we get from the Ten Commandments. So the answer is agree, because Western values are religious values. Now, I personally would like my children to learn, explicitly about Jesus. I'm Catholic, so they'll go to a Catholic school. You may not want that, and that's fine, to each their own, but they're still learning religious values whether you know it or not. So again, checkmate atheists. Okay, last page. Ooh, finally, a look at sex. All right, fun. Sex outside marriage is usually immoral. Again, I'm Catholic. Um, oh, strongly agree. Yep. A same-sex couple living in a stable, loving relationship should not be excluded from the possibility of child adoption. This is really controversial one here. I'm going to give a possibly convoluted explanation. I got this idea from Jordan Peterson, although I think I came up with the analogy myself. I'm not sure. My answers agree here. Think of people like a tetherball pole. You know, the one where you hit the ball back and forth, trying to wrap the ball around your in your opponent's direction. That one. Anyway, the ideal in society is the tetherball pole. When it comes to raising kids, the ideal situation is to be in a loving two-parent household with a mom and dad presence in the home. As you unwind the ball from the pole, the ball gets further and further away from the pole. In this analogy, the ball is the farthest society lets us stray from the ideal and still be considered acceptable. And when it comes to raising children, we've deemed that single motherhood is acceptable. Now, that's obviously not the ideal, but it falls between where the ball is and the pole. Non-natural parents is acceptable. Like I said, I'm adopted. It would be insane if we did not allow adoption, although ideally every parent would raise their own kids. But that falls within the standard. What about same-sex couples? I know society now generally includes them on the ball and within the ball, and that's fine. Generally, I'm not there personally yet. You can make an argument that a two-parent same-sex household is closer to the ideal than a single-parent household. That might be true, but for me, I don't know if I've seen the evidence yet to back that up. So for now, I'm saying disagree. Sorry. So now I'm saying disagree, but I might change all ears. Next one. Pornography depicting consenting adults should be legal for the adult population. Strongly disagree. Porn ruins men of all ages. Next one. What goes on in a private bedroom between consenting adults is no business of the state. I'll agree on this one. I think it's silly to try to regulate action as private as that. Yeah. No one can feel naturally homosexual. I don't know. I think disagree. From what I've seen, I think it could be natural, but frankly, even from a religious perspective, that doesn't change a thing, because acting on your desires is still wrong. Just as from a Catholic perspective, it's wrong on me to act on my desires with my fiance. It's wrong for married couples to wear protection. That's right. Even for married couples, if you're actively preventing the possibility of new life, it's wrong. So, yeah, disagree. Don't act. Okay. These days, openness about sex has gone too far. Strongly agree. No need to really even discuss that one. That's an open and shut case. Okay. Let's see my results here. Okay. This is what the graph looks like. I'm guessing I'll be somewhere up here in the authoritarian right. We'll see. I'm not going to be up where Saudi Arabia and Singapore is. So, okay, here we go. Oh, right. 4.63, 1.23. Okay. Slightly higher on the, I thought I'd be higher on the authoritarian side. And I hate libertarians. I think libertarianism is for children and dumbasses who know nothing about politics, and increasingly for liberal comedians who think they're conservative when really they just hate the Democrat Party, so they found themselves voting for Trump. So if you're conservative, beware of listening to those guys. Generally, I'm right where I expect to be on the left-right axis economically. I like free markets with a few necessary guardrails. I generally buy into Milton Friedman's school of thought, at least on things like inflation. I believe in strong property rights. So, yeah, I'm about where I should be, I think. Thanks for sticking around. If you want to see how you compare to me, I'll drop the Political Compass link in the description, along with my email X account. Go follow me over on X. Daily political takes, sometimes sports, pretty much whatever's on my mind that day. Hit like, subscribe, comment your results of your political compass below. I want to know where you land on the compass and how it compares to me. And throw in the comments, who do you think wins the Super Bowl? I think I'm leaning Seahawks right now, but keep an eye on the Jaguars. Nobody talks about them, but they've been on fire this year. They can make a serious run. That's it for today. Maybe Friday I'll be back with a more typical video. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time. Thank you.